Terry, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today on Culture Corner. It's great to see you again, and thank you very much for taking a trip down to Leeds. Much appreciated.
Really happy to, yeah. That was so much more formal than the conversation we just had, but that's brilliant. No, really nice to have this opportunity to chat to you, so thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to go on to, obviously, to talk about culture and high performance and that kind of thing, but I thought what would be, obviously I know you, but for anyone who's listening that doesn't, if you could just give a bit of an overview of who you are, what you do, your team responsibilities and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm currently a director of engineering at a company called Mews, they deliver kind of SaaS-based property management software. Okay. So we manage software for hotels across the globe, really, and growing a lot. I think the company's currently at about 1,000 people, but growing rapidly. So. Wow. Fascinating space.
Yeah.
Though my background certainly isn't property management, it's been general tech. So I've worked lots of health techs, I've worked in agency environments, gambling, so all sorts really. And been in tech, goodness, for about 30 years professionally. So the first 15 years as an individual contributor, and I kind of worked through all the layers. I finished pretty much as a staff engineer.
Yeah.
Then sort of moved into management. I was quite reluctant to start with, as I'm an introvert, and I used to love being the person who delivered the solution in code and sat in the back room and just, I wasn't a great talker or anything like that. But I kept getting pushed into leadership roles. And it was about 15 years ago, I sort of realized I was enjoying helping people as much as I was enjoying writing the code. And that's what kind of got me a bit closer to management. And I've managed since then, and started obviously as an EM. And for the past 7 or 8 years, I've been like a manager of managers, and I've done mainly director roles, but I've done head of engineering, which has spanned, multiple parts of an org and things like that. So yeah, a colourful career.
Very good. And what do you think it was that I suppose your managers at the time saw in you to you said you got pushed into the management bit? Was it because they could see that you liked helping people and that was a passion of yours, do you think?
No, I think at the time it was probably accidental. And we do this in tech a lot. It's you take the very good individual contributors and you think, okay, they're ready for the next level, and often that next level was perceived to be management. But in real terms, management's a totally different job. And the first few times I kind of delved into it, and I came in and out of management a little bit at the start, I was terrible at it. I was, because I wasn't passionate about it in the same way that I am today. So, I think it was one of those. It was before we had dual track for career development. Yeah. So there wasn't really anything beyond staff. So it was, okay, can you manage the team now? Yeah. But it was a skill set I didn't have at the time. It was, it was alien to me. So not the best manager when I first started.
But that's not an unusual story.
No.
Very much in the recruitment world, it's if you're good at sales and someone succeeds and is very good at sales, they're doing really, really well. Okay, right. Your next role, if you want to move up the ladder, is to manage a team. Yeah. Quite often, you don't have the skills, so you have to learn or be trained very quickly.
Absolutely.
But not everybody transitions well, do they? Not everybody is. Just because they perform well in a single role, that doesn't necessarily make them a great manager.
Yeah, and we're often, and we still do this today in tech, which is tragic. We kind of throw individual contributors into the deep end of the pool and make them managers, but we don't give them any floats or anything like that. We don't give them any tools to help them. Often people don't get training, so you're kind of trying to work it out yourself, but often in isolation. It's, the worst examples are just, stay at the bottom of the pool or swim. And we can do a lot better than that, especially today. But that was how I got into it. It was just thrown in and said, can you manage the team now?
Can you go with it? Yeah. Wow, baptism of fire for you then.
Indeed.
Thinking about that and thinking about, you look at some of the businesses that you've worked with, they're phenomenal companies on your CV with the Glaxos and Tombolas and Helix of this world and that kind of thing. you got thrown in at the deep end. Did you go and like search out a mentor or a coach? Have you ever got involved in that? I was intrigued as to whether you've gone down that route and what the benefits are, or how you found it if you have done it.
I have done later.
Right.
I didn't at the start because I almost didn't know what I didn't know, and I felt like I had to solve the problems myself. So I've typically always been a reader. In growing my career, I was a book reader or studying from websites and things. So I just started reading. And even then I wasn't really reaching out to any communities of managers in the same way that, I encourage mine to do today kind of thing. Yeah. It was more isolated than that. So it started with book reading and experimenting. I had a team who were brilliant. They were high performers without me, I hasten to add. But, I would read a book on coaching, for example, and then I would just go into the chat with the team and say, I've just read a book on coaching. I'm going to try to help with coaching. I'll get it wrong, but I would love us to experiment. And they were super supportive in letting me do that. And I made a few mistakes, but I think the team appreciated that I was doing this to try and help. So that made a lot of difference. And then over time, of course, I think everybody should have a mentor of some sort, whether it's somebody to coach them or whether it's just somebody to bounce ideas off. It's so important because we never have the answer. We'll have some answers, but we don't have all the answers, and having somebody to bounce those things off is really important. Yeah,
it makes you just sort of almost sense check sometimes the way you're going or your thoughts, or gives you that additional headspace. Doesn't it?
A bit of validation, or indeed a bit of challenge. If I think A is the answer, and having somebody be able to challenge that and say, had you considered B, and kind of explore that with me is more powerful than most of the other things I do in leadership.
Yeah. And I like the way, even at the start, the early bit, I like the way that you frame that with your team. I've read a book on coaching. I'm going to get things wrong. I'd like us to, you got that vulnerability right from the off.
And it was uncomfortable. Vulnerability is not a normal thing in business, of course. And we got better at it, but the first few asks of that were hard. We started then, I ran a book club. So we were reading these books together because people were interested in what I was learning. So we'd then go off and read, say, Amy Edmondson's book on psychological safety or, Turn the Ship Around or something like that. And then we'd talk about it in a group. So that was helping change practice as well, but everybody was leveling up together kind of thing.
That's a good idea. That's because it gets everybody on board, doesn't it? And you're all sort of understanding the process at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've done that in almost every company I've worked in since. So even in Mews now, we're interested in kind of what makes high-performing teams and having more of that conversation. So as a group, we're reading 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I've read it in every org I've been in, and I love it. Such a powerful book. But reading it together with the team and then going through the survey and measuring ourselves, it'll just, again, help that conversation about what does better look like.
I've cheated. I've listened to it on a blink.
Nice.
I've got 15 minutes here, so I do need to, but it was very interesting. Very interesting. You're talking about the trust, aren't you, and the just aspect and holding people accountable and things like that. And what was it? Constructive. What's the word that I'm looking for? Constructive. Where you fall out, not where you fall out, but conflict.
Conflict.
Constructive conflict. Yeah.
And that's like the second level. Obviously, the base level is trust, and then there's a fear of conflict typically in teams, and conflict's essential for good outcomes. And conflict doesn't mean, having a fight or arguing, but you have to have somebody willing to say, hold on, I don't think that's right. I think we should do this, or bring ideas to the table. And part of Lencioni's kind of leveling up model, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy. You can't proceed to the top of it, which is inattention to results, if you don't solve well for the levels below it.
Go through the process. Perfect. Well, we'll dig into that a bit further in a bit.
Sounds good.
I was going to ask you, just before we get into the culture bit, how did you get into tech? Was it always your go-to? You knew what you were going to do from a young age?
It's tragic to admit that I was terrible at everything except tech through my kind of academic life. My dad bought me I'm showing my age now, bought me a VIC-20 when I was 8 years old. And I loved, there were adverts at the time and it was all about the gaming, which was terrible on a VIC-20, but it was still better than nothing, which is kind of where I'd been. But the computer came with a book and I think it was BASIC at the time. I can't remember the language, but and it gave you some of the syntax, and I just started programming. So I wrote my first program a couple of days after Christmas when I was 8, and I was hooked. The idea that I could type something in, a set of commands, and I got something back out the screen. It was just, that blew me away. So I've been programming since I was about 8.
Wow.
And although I'm a leader now, and it's not my day job, I still code today. My middle son, Louis, is 18, and he's doing a computing degree, same one I did 30 years ago, which is incredible. And we'll sit and program Python together, and it's I'm helping him see some of the nuances of the language. So when he comes back with his assignment scores and he's like 36 out of 40, and I was like, Daddy still got it. I love it, absolutely love it. So
brilliant. A good language to choose, Python as well. It's in demand, isn't it?
Indeed.
The moment?
Yeah, for sure.
And how's it following in Dad's footsteps? Definitely.
I think he sees my career, and I talk to the kids a lot about kind of my job, and my wife's like a social work manager, so they kind of see both sides. And Louis, my middle son, is he just loves the idea of the career. He's seen how I've gone through mine, and he fancies some of that, and he's a gamer and all of that. So he's
brilliant.
He's hooked.
Fantastic. And was it off to university, then from university for yourself into your first job?
Pretty much, yeah. I did. I studied at Northumbria in Newcastle, and the third year was a Sandwich year. Right. And being honest, I hated the degree at the end of the second year. I really struggled with I'm not a strong academic,
right?
So I was getting 40% pass rates. I was not good academically. But in the third year, I went and worked in Newcastle Medical School. That was the first job I had. And they were doing stuff on the web. And it was back in the day, it was Perl, it was CGI, it was kind of interactive websites. And this was when, Google didn't exist. It was Alta Vista was a search engine. Amazon was almost a book company. Pizza Hut, I think, was on there, but you filled in a form and then they phoned you back. So that the web was still very black and white. And we were doing stuff on the web, and I was hooked. That was going to be my career. I just loved it. So I only finished part of the final year, and I actually finished without a degree. I've got like what's called a degree with distinction, so I didn't do the honours part of the final year. And touch wood, I haven't needed it in the past 25 years. But I've worked with the web ever since, and that I was hooked. The idea of that really dynamic and people from across the world could access the content it just blew me away.
It's brilliant that as well, and it's great to hear. But like when I started my career and back when you started yours, that it wasn't like you said, you didn't finish your degree, but it wasn't a barrier to entry. You think about. You must have seen it yourself, but there's so many companies out there saying, I need somebody who's got a first or a 2-1 from a red brick university, and the list goes on, and you're thinking, how are you going to recruit anybody? It's a competitive world. And
I know you mentioned we're going to talk about like inclusive hiring, but that's maybe the past 10 years now since I've had control of hiring. It's the thing I've always removed from job descriptions, like the need for a degree. Because some of the most talented people I've ever worked with don't have formal pathways into tech. They started programming as kids. They didn't go into even A levels, and they're just superb. So I've always removed that from job descriptions because it's just not important.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. It's strange, isn't it? And you're taking a chunk of the workforce, a good chunk of the workforce, and just removing them. And in a highly competitive market, there's tech. Why wouldn't you want access to everybody?
Indeed.
But we'll dive into that in a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking about culture. What do you think makes a good culture, Terry? What in your eyes?
That's not a small question. I mean, God, it's easy to define what it's not.
Yeah.
And I'll start there, and then I'll talk about what I think it is, because it's a lot of companies have values.
Yeah.
So Mews has 5, and I really like them, but I look at company values, and that's not culture. It doesn't matter what a company says; it's about what a company does.
Yeah.
So it's not about slogans on the wall for sure, but it's everything a company does after that. I think we often think of culture as this kind of amorphous thing. It's a verb. It's a doing word.
Yeah.
And I love, there's a brilliant study by John Shook who talks about acting your way to a new way of thinking. Like, you can't think about the culture you want. You have to act it. And for me, that's everything. So it's, at the start of a one-to-one, it's asking how somebody is and caring personally about them and their family.
Yeah.
It's caring enough to give somebody some feedback when they could have improved something. It's challenging people. It's all of those good things. But it's also, unfortunately, a manager shouting at their team, or underperformance not being addressed, or an individual contributor just being awful on a pull request for code kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's every behavior, and unfortunately some of those are brilliant and they raise the bar on culture and what it is, but some of them are not, and they lower the bar. And there's that famous phrase, like, the culture is the behaviors you walk past.
Yes, we've mentioned that in the past.
Absolutely. And it's, or there's another really famous one, the culture is the worst behaviors the manager is willing to tolerate. And you walk past behaviors where somebody's not matching what you want. That's your culture. That's what you've accepted. Or there's somebody underperforming in the team and you're not dealing with that. That's your culture.
That's the culture,
So it's everything, but it's the behaviours. It's what you do every day.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it makes it's a number of different things made together, isn't it? And it evolves, isn't it? You compete. Some people just think, we create the culture and that job done and away we go, but it doesn't. It evolves, and it evolves with every single hire you make.
Exactly, and every single day, every decision that's made either helps or reduces the culture, kind of thing. And it's a constant investment. The good thing is, like, all of the evidence now is you invest in culture and you get results. Exactly. And people often think culture is the fluffy stuff, and it's not. It's anything, but it's really hard. Like, these are the human skills, or the soft skills. I hate the term, but the human skills. And what we do with culture defines what we do with delivery, with impact, with value, with market share, with all of those things. You can't get there without these. And often, I think companies get that wrong. They try and focus solidly on delivery, and culture's the afterthought. But you'll only ever get diluted results with that. And again, the evidence is massive on that.
There's a lot of it, isn't it? Coming out, a lot of it. So, what's the culture like I've got a bit of an insight because we've spoken a few times, but what's the culture like at Mews? Obviously, you're a remote first organisation, so if you give us a bit of an insight, and how as a leadership team do you ensure that evolves? So it's quite a big question.
It's a great question though. I mean, it's interesting. I've been at Mews now for 5 months, so I'm still slightly in the honeymoon period, I suppose, but I remember saying to my wife, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into being there, I found my people.
Oh, wow.
Because I my day job is leading tech teams, helping tech teams be effective, deliver value, all of that sort of thing. But I don't want to work in a company where the culture is an afterthought. And within a few weeks at Mews, I saw exactly the opposite. Culture was front and center. And they do that in a lot of different ways. I mean, they've got We mentioned briefly DEI. They've got DEI groups on LGBT, on mental health, on neurodiversity. They've got inclusion groups. There's a lot of that.
Wow.
But it's very deliberate as well. There's one of our people teams, Sarah, is phenomenal, and she's running what's called the Remarkable Managers Program. So all managers can attend training on coaching, on feedback, on difficult conversations, and we're trying to level each other up to help with that. And then we've got lots of little, like we have, we're async, so lots of Slack conversation. But we've got a learning channel, so anywhere anybody reads something interesting, it tends to be shared in there with somebody's thoughts. It starts conversations. We've got something called Think Club, which is kind of more academic, but looking at studies in culture and then having a broad conversation about it. We've got manager champions groups. So I joined this early, and it's part of my job to help champion what better can look like in the org as well, because often people leave these things to the people team. And they're brilliant at it, of course, and our people team are superb, but you can't ever have the broad impact you would have unless you kind of deliver that across the org. So having champions in different parts of the org to help roll out good practice is massive. All of that.
It's interesting, and it's done with a purpose. It doesn't sound like all of a sudden it's a light bulb moment. Oh, we're just going to do this because it feels like it's the right thing to do. It's actually done with a purpose, and it sounds like people buy into that and really help to drive it.
100%, and it's as a company we're kind of unapologetic that we are a fast-moving company. We are growing. The work is hard, but the balance of getting the culture right as well as delivering value is, it's there. There's a proper balance between the two, because you can't get to that without having the culture underpinning it. So there's lots of investment. You see that all the way from the top. We have a weekly all hands, both tragically and brilliantly called a Mews Bouche. So the company's Mews. And one of either Richard, the founder, or Matt, the CEO, will come on each week and they're talking about these things. We'll champion things like good feedback that has been received. And then, all departments tend to give a little bit of an update. It's really powerful. And it's stuff like that about connecting the people that makes all the difference in how you deliver the results, I think.
Definitely. I like the sound of that. And is that an all hands where I've read a few bits and listened to a few bits where it's totally nothing's off the table, you can ask questions?
100%.
That's brilliant.
And we prep them beforehand, so we use Slido, and people can ask questions beforehand, and then they almost get a slide dedicated to a particular question if it's a bigger question. And somebody, typically from the leadership, will start the conversation on that. But then you can just have live questions going along as well as we go through it. So it's really, really powerful.
That's brilliant. And then again, that's not something that you can do half-heartedly, is it? It's been thought about. There's a purpose behind that. And if there's any questions in there that are quite challenging or need sort of, I suppose, bits of feedback around how things could change, is somebody responsible specifically for following those up and actioning those where possible?
Typically, yeah. And if it's culture, for example, it would tend to be the people team who would pick something like that up.
Okay.
But mostly they'll be coordinating when it's a broader thing. And it just depends. Like we've had some finance conversations around pay reviews recently, for example. And of course the finance team have picked those up and started that conversation. So there's a really good and I don't know if it's deliberate, it's certainly not one of our values, but a really good ownership and accountability culture in there as well. People are, it's almost like an expectation that people own and are accountable for things, but not in a negative way. It works really well.
It works well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. It sounds great. It sounds really good.
It's a good
really
laugh.
Good. I can see why you found your people, why you enjoy it so much. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things you were talking about before is, or we were discussing in the past, how the impact of a leader, the impact a leader can have on the culture, I suppose, within their team or within the organisation. And what do you think makes a good leader, and what's your leadership style, and has it like evolved? Is it servant leader? Is it
interesting? Yeah, it's goodness, what makes a good leader? I think it's like typically in a culture, the most effective cultures are kind of high safety, high accountability. And there's lots of models on this, like Amy Edmondson's got one for psychological safety, where, you've got to have high safety and high performance standards, and then you get into this kind of psychologically safe environment. Or Kim Scott in Radical Candor talks about kind of care personally and then challenge directly. And then you're into radical candor kind of thing. So I think it's that sort of combination of care and challenge, whatever they look like. But it's, you've got to have good accountability and good high performance standards, of course, because if you haven't, you're leaving money on the table. And ultimately, within business, we're all there to make sure the business is successful. We're not just there to have a fluffy culture kind of thing. But without the care personally, then again, you can get like toxic cultures. You can get what Kim Scott would call like obnoxious aggression. Challenging, but not necessarily creating safety kind of thing. So, high accountability and high safety. And then, goodness, my leadership style, it's evolved. And I think I default mostly, there's two styles I kind of piggyback onto. One is, and you mentioned it, servant leadership. I really like the idea that, like, I don't create value. I should be amplifying it. And I should be helping teams realize it. But I'm not writing code anymore. That's a brilliant phrase, saying, without our teams, we're just a room of people talking to PowerPoint slides kind of thing. And it's true, my value is about amplifying what my teams are doing. It's the individual contributors who are building the software. It's them who are creating the value. So I love the inverted pyramid of servant leadership, where the CEO doesn't sit at the top, they sit at the bottom. And it's our job to support the people on the front line who are our individual contributors, because ultimately they're the closest thing to the customer, be it our customer support people or software engineers. So servant leadership works really well, and there's lots of elements to that work really well. But I think just sticking to that one style, you can get into a place where you become a bit of a bottleneck as a leader. There's that reliance on you to help the team. So I really quite like kind of democratic leadership style or participative, because part of my job is to make sure I'm not needed. And I only semi-joke about this whenever I join and start leading teams, but 12 months after I join a company, if I'm still really needed every day, I probably haven't done a good enough job. It's my job to create stronger leaders. It's my job to create autonomous teams. It's my job to help them create a future for them. And you've done well as a leader when you can step away for a couple of weeks for a holiday and nothing changes, and people just get on with it and they own it and they take accountability. Like, that's super powerful. So those are my defaults. But like, as Mews is going through some amazing growth this year, it's super exciting, but a little bit of things like transformational leadership at the moment, because we're moving into a bit of higher growth, a bit of higher focus on delivery and things like that. So some of that is about that transformation into that new thing as well. Still with those defaults I've got, but it's just helping people see that vision and where we're going, and how they can connect the dots of what they do day to day to that future picture kind of thing.
Which leads into the communication and transparency piece, doesn't it? Definitely. Which we'll touch on in a bit as well. But you mentioned a couple of times, we both talked about it in the past, but the importance of psychological safety in a strong culture and high performing teams. Why is it important? And putting you on the spot today, why is it important? And how do you as a leader, do you have any sort of hints and tips or anything that you've done in the past where you help your new teams or new employees,
Yeah.
you have that sense of belonging, you build that trust, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good shout. It's I guess how important is it? It's, you know, it's fundamental, but I think it's interesting. It's been weaponized a little. It's almost part of buzzword bingo now.
Yeah.
You know, it's, if we say psychological safety in a meeting 3 times, suddenly we have it, kind of thing, and it's just not true. But it's misrepresented now as well, and people often think, to Amy Edmondson's kind of 4-quadrant graph kind of thing, you know, the safety element is on the vertical, and they think it's about high safety, which it absolutely is. But they forget to include the high accountability, high performance standards. And without that, that's not really psychological safety. It's just being nice.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a nice company is lovely, but you're never really going to get to results. You're never really going to get to the thing that helps the business be successful. So, yeah, it's become a little weaponized and a little misrepresented. And there's some amazing work by people like Tom Geraghty, Amy Edmondson, of course, and others about trying to demystify that and clarify it. And they share a lot. Like Tom Geraghty's weekly newsletter on psych safety is just amazing. And he deep dives into topics like this. But yeah, how do I create it? I think it's there's a kind of few things, and Amy Edmondson talks about these as well, like modeling my own fallibility, because often people look to leaders as having the answers.
Yeah,
I haven't got the answers. I've got 30 years of experience that says I might have an opinion, but mostly what we do, especially in tech, and Amy Edmondson talks about this, about being like a VUCA world, VUCA, so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You know, we haven't been here before.
Yeah.
So if that's the world we're in, you need brains, you need people's voices, you need all of that. And of course, creating that safety helps bring those people there. But acknowledging your own fallibility and just saying to our teams, you know, I haven't got all the answers here. I need your help to help us get there.
Yeah.
So even for our strategy this year within my own particular part of Mews, the teams have helped build that strategy, because I've got a vision on it, but we've had, you know, it's better because we've collaborated on it, and they're now bought into it because they had a voice in it as well.
Yeah.
But they had as many answers as I did on what we should be doing. So yeah, modeling fallibility for sure. And then modeling curiosity. You know, so often leaders will come into the room and they're not always curious. And curiosity massively helps. If I turn up into a room and say, I don't think that's right, well, you're going to get quiet immediately. If I turn up and say, help me understand that, it's a very, very different answer. And you tend to start a conversation as well. And it's interesting. Psych safety is, it's what they call a group level phenomena. So you don't always get it at a company level. And there's lots of examples of this where Pixar was a great example. They had, you know, something called the brain trust. So every movie goes through this really rigorous process about challenge, and you almost present your ideas in a group of people and your peers are expected to challenge you. That's a brilliant example of psych safety. But you also had some really complex things happen with Pixar during the Me Too movement, where it was clear that people just weren't able to speak up about a senior executive there. So there was, so it's not universal in a company. So there might be, even Mews, might have pockets where it's not psychologically safe and pockets where it is. I think the good thing at Mews, I see it modelled from the top as well. So
which helps.
That helps. It helps massively, that shadow of the leader kind of thing. But it's on everybody to step into a place of discomfort. It's... Amy Edmondson talks about like modeling your own fallibility in that, and modeling your own vulnerability and being part of that. But as leaders, we can go first. It's easy to go first. We have positional power, and much as we like to talk about the fact that it's not there and we're quite egalitarian and flat and things like that, we do, a director title or even a manager title we can go first.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we model some of these behaviours first, it encourages our teams to do the same. So often if I'm having one-to-ones or even skip levels, I'll be saying, what could I do better? Or what advice would you give me to help me improve our teams? And just even hearing that, I mean, sometimes the conversations are amazing, but little things like that can help bring that psychological safety into the room.
Yeah. The barriers just come down straight away, don't they?
Hugely.
Or at least they drop significantly. That allows that engagement then.
Yeah.
But I love that the I don't have all the answers. You know, it's so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. I always have to do it. So when I first started at Mews with my initial teams, but even the team I picked up yesterday, one of the first things I say is, I'm really opinionated. You know, I've had 30 years of building up opinions, but my opinion's less important than yours. And if I have something where it's super strong and I absolutely feel it's the right thing, I'll be explicit about that.
Right.
But mostly I'll come and I'll ask questions, but you should view my opinion as less important than yours because you've got more experience. You're close to the code base, or you're close to the problem that the customer's facing. And just trying to set that stage that my voice will always be there, but it's not the important voice in the room.
I like that.
You know, setting the stage like that can again help massively.
Yeah, I like that. Sounds like you ensure your teams all have a voice, because that's
critical.
part of it, isn't it? Ensuring everybody's got a voice, everybody's making a contribution to it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the you know, fundamental underpinnings of psych safety. Like, you know, if you don't hear that voice, at worst, bad things happen. I mean, people, you know, in hospital scenarios and aircraft, there's been people die. But at best, you're missing out on ideas, and that idea could have been the next thing that could have generated massive value for the business. So creating the space where the voices are heard lets you make sure that everything is on the table, kind of thing.
Definitely. And you've got to be conscious as a leader, haven't you, of how you respond when something's 100%. Said as well, because you don't want to say, oh, like, everybody's got a voice, I don't have all the answers, and then somebody says something and your response to it results in that person thinking, I'm never going to speak up again. It's counterproductive, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think it's you know, having worked with my teams now for 5 months, I think I've been there, I often take a coaching approach. I'll ask questions rather than give strong opinions all the time. And I got some feedback from, it was actually a skip level, but one of my managers as well, that the coaching approach wasn't always the most useful. So we now have a thing, Terry, just tell us. And it's a flag they can all raise at any point, because often I'll be asking the questions and they can see there's something I'm thinking and I'm trying to lead them towards.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just want to bypass all that conversation and, oh, Terry, just tell us. And it's only been flagged twice in maybe the past month, but it's a great little, again, it's safety. You know, the fact that they feel, Terry, stop talking and just tell us what you're thinking. It's a really nice way of knowing there's a safety there, but also it's a really nice way of the team interacting, kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to say, when you mentioned the coaching, so in my previous job, I had a coach for a while. The first time I ever had it, and it was great. So I always like to try new things. It can be really hard work. Don't get me wrong. I was genuinely tired after the sessions. So I thought I'll take that on board, and I'll try the coaching aspect as well within the teams. And I said, sometimes, I get it wrong all the time, but sometimes I found it frustrating and thinking, it doesn't matter how many times I try and coach this individual, they're not going to get, a bit like what you said before, if you don't know, you don't know. Yeah. And sometimes you just got to say, look, this is the process.
Yes. Yeah.
But you don't want to be spoon feeding people the answer constantly, do you?
Aye. And I think it's interesting, because that's one of the things that seems to be hardest in management is feedback. And the thing I see most, especially early managers, and I was terrible for this, is that nice versus kind. It's you know, being nice to a person versus actually being kind and giving them the feedback. That second one is hard. It's a muscle to build up, and it's a really hard one to do. Once you get into it and you start to get the positive reinforcement of it, it becomes so much easier. And my managers and I probably I mean, goodness, easily sharing feedback multiple times a week with each other, them to me and me to them. But we've just got such a high trust level now that becomes the norm. So they'll give me a lot of feedback as well as I give them. But you have to get past that nice thing, because you'll never be, certainly in leadership, you'll never be completely effective if you're being nice. You know, if you've got elements of underperformance and I don't tell you that, well, they're just going to continue. And I've certainly, I mean, we've all worked in places like that. There was a time, I think it was about 6-7 months after an event, I got feedback, but it was in a performance review. And if I'd just gotten it at the time, I could have, you know, made the change. But actually, I'd made the same mistake multiple times during that period as well, because I had no feedback. And it was that nice versus kind again. Yeah, definitely.
And really, for the nice, I was going to ask you about it, because I know I've read your article on LinkedIn where you talk about it. So being kind to somebody is giving them the constructive feedback, which will help them then go on and develop and better. But being nice is really shirking away from the you know, the difficult conversations.
There's a funny model with radical candor, and it's a tragic example of, you know, if you come back from the toilet and your zip's down, and being nice is just not saying anything, you know, just I don't want to embarrass Adrian, and I certainly don't want to embarrass myself. And kind or radically candid, or, you know, is me just, you know, leaning over and saying, you know, your zip's down. And that's kind. That's useful. You want to know that. And you should know that. And none of us turn up to work to be average. You know, it's we're not just turning up and hoping to just get to the end of the day. You know, we want to be better, and we want to hear when we can be better. So kind is about saying those things, obviously in an empathetic way, in a caring way. You know, you have to care about that person first. It's not just, you know, being obnoxiously aggressive, as Kim Scott would call it, and shouting to the room that the zip's down. It's more, you know, caring about you, and then caring enough to give you that feedback. So would that sort of fall in line with is it ruinous empathy? Ruinous empathy, yes. I'm a recovering ruinously empathetic person. And it's that caring a lot about a person. So you and I would probably have a really good relationship, but I was never challenging you. I was never giving you feedback or anything like that. And often you see managers in that space, their teams love them. But they're not used to just having a nice person around them. But actually, again, it's leaving money on the table, because in fact, nobody's perfect. And I have so many gaps. So, you know, if I'm not hearing about those things in a radically candid way, there's a gap. There's a gap there. So ruinous empathy is what Kim Scott would call it, yes. But it's that, again, it's being nice. Yeah, definitely. And having empathy, I've just started to listen to a few podcasts recently on emotional intelligence and empathy and how important. But empathy is very, very, very important, isn't it? Hugely. And both of them. I think ashamed to admit my early management career, like, I lacked emotional intelligence. We talk about the amygdala hijack, the kind of, you know, that sort of feeling like somebody's just given you some feedback, for example, and you immediately kick off. And I was terrible for it. So within my own team, I kind of created a walled garden to protect them, so they didn't see it. But if I was working with teams outside of my own and they were getting in the way or slowing us down, I was a bit of an ass. And developing emotional intelligence, there's an amazing guy, and I think I've mentioned it before, Paul Cheatham. He's got his own kind of coaching and emotional intelligence company, but he was an HR lead at a company I was working with when I was struggling, and he took me through emotional intelligence, like, you know, one-to-one. It was so powerful. And it made such a difference in how I turned up to conversations. Because emotional intelligence isn't about not getting angry or anything like that. It's okay to be angry, so long as it's a deliberate choice to do so. Rather than the amygdala saying, you know what, there's lines in the room and you need to react. But empathy as well. I mean, there's that famous phrase, treat people how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And that's kind of not true. It's treat people how they want to be treated.
Yeah.
And, we all have different life experiences. We all have completely different things going on. And me understanding your space, me understanding your lived experience and things like that is only ever going to help me support you. If I'm challenging you on something, but I haven't understood that you've just had an awful morning, you got stuck in traffic in Leeds,
would you believe it?
Then that's not a very empathetic way of doing it. In real terms, trying to understand things from the other person's perspective and put yourself into their shoes. We've got this thing called fundamental attribution error, which is if you do something wrong, it's you're flawed. Whereas if I do something wrong, situational. It was a bad morning. The puppy was awake all night. And we've got to be really careful of fundamental attribution error. But it links in with empathy and about just, again, trying to get into the space where that other person is. Yeah,
definitely. I was listening to a podcast on the way over this morning. They were saying, although you can be cognitive empathy, although you can be empathetic to me, understanding sort of, like you said, my background, where I've come from, or my views on certain things, it doesn't mean you have to fall in line with those. It just means you have to 100%. Understand them.
Yeah. And I think we talk a lot about empathy and perhaps less about compassion. And I love Brené Brown. Brené Brown differentiates the two. So she talks about empathy as being the jumping into that space and caring with the person. Often in leadership, you tend to lean towards compassion, which is empathy with action kind of thing. So, of course, I want to empathize with you, but also part of my job is not just to sit there and empathize, but actually, okay, how can we help? How can we move forward with that? So compassion is super powerful, and probably the thing I lean on more than just empathy. Of course, there's scenarios where empathy is absolutely the right thing to do, but sometimes you have to take it to that next stage of, okay, how can I help? What can we do about this?
How do we move it forward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry. I'm keen to talk about this because I know Mews are going through like you said, huge growth stage at the moment, and just business is looking strong for you guys. Inclusive recruitment processes, and we've talked about them in the past, and how important they are. And I imagine Mews has got a great inclusive process.
I think it certainly seems better than other places I've worked. And I think there's so many facets to that, isn't there? I mean, we talked about the job description part and, not requiring a degree, which isn't true of all jobs at Mews, I hasten to add, but certainly, it's something in tech I always remove. But there's other things like it's very different in a job description having a list of 10 skills that are required versus saying, you will be doing things like this on the job. Because the 10 required immediately negates a whole chunk of your market. As a cisgendered middle-aged white man, I tick all of the privilege boxes. So I've only got 4 of those things, but I'm going to apply anyway because I'll be good. But typically, either minority groups or, women will look at those list of 10 and say, I don't tick the boxes, so I'm not going to apply. So even just finding simple ways of changing the language in job descriptions can make a massive difference. I run job descriptions through something called Gender Decoder, but there's many services like this. And how masculine is the language on that job description? In tech, it's so easy to make a thing appeal to just me. And it's about changing the language as well. But then I think there's a brilliant person in this space, Mary Williams, who was CTO of Monzo and she's been CTO of Helix when I was there as well. And she talks a lot about this, and it's about, all of those signals that say I should be there as well. So, it's not just the job description. As I look at a company, what am I seeing? So if I'm a woman, what does senior leadership look like? At Mews, a whole chunk of our senior leaders are women. and the really active voices in the community and things. So that's super powerful. It's like, I belong there.
Yeah.
I can have a voice here and I can progress. So little things like that help massively. And then looking at your policies as well. As a parent to a trans child, I've had health insurance before where the person was negated from getting any support because it was considered a pre-existing condition.
Wow.
So little things, and that's the default, unfortunately.
Is it?
So when I worked at Helix, that wasn't a thing. It's Mary had done an amazing job at helping to get that to a very different place where pre-existing conditions were covered.
Yeah.
So little things like that, again, make a massive difference to who you can appeal to and the story that you tell. And there's lots of other bits and pieces. It sounds trite to say things like unlimited holiday, and we have things called Wellness Wednesdays, but we don't measure bums on seats. We measure outcomes, and that's so much better for somebody with a relatively inflexible life, maybe somebody with a young family or something like that, because they need to be able to work in the way that they work. And they can still be brilliantly effective. They're just not necessarily 9-to-5ers. So it's about taking all of those into consideration, I think, and trying to create something that is getting the best people for all the right reasons, kind of thing.
Yeah, through the door. I like quite a bit of what you said there. Is the points on the job spec actually relate to the job. Forget all of the fluff or the woolliness that goes around it. What is this job and what does it require? And be concise on it, but also having a sort of we've talked about this before, but a flexible and adaptable recruitment process. Some people might not be very good in provide information around theoretical situations. It's like do rather than show, and have those options as well. And even for us, I mean, we have like a technical test stage, of course, for our individual contributors. Now, in real terms, if somebody's got a great GitHub profile and they've got either they've worked on open source or they've got public stuff there that can be seen, I don't need to technically test them. I'll chat to them about that because I can look at their commit history. I can look at how they're working. So just having different approaches to all of that, like hiring process, is massive for people. For sure. Yeah, definitely. It's that, and also the explanation around what is expected in the interview. We've told you'll meet Terry for your interview's an hour and a half, where you meet Terry first, and you'll meet members of the team and these specific members of the team, and you just document exactly what the individual is going into.
And we did a kick-off on Monday. Goodness, it's Wednesday already. For a role I'm opening, and one of the conversations was around neurodiversity and how can we make this as clear as possible. So we're really clear on the steps in interview. We're clear on what will happen. We haven't gotten to the point yet where we send out the questions that we're going to ask, but they're all scripted, so we could do that, and I no objections to that, because it's most of the questions are about understanding your experience. They're not like academic. They're not, tell me about DevOps. That, talk to me about how you've applied these principles in work. So it just gives people who are a little more stressed at interview, and lots of people are, the ability to do a little bit of prep and a little bit of thinking beforehand. So things like that, I think, make a massive difference.
There's a lot of controversy around the questions beforehand, isn't there?
Indeed.
But it will help people that need that support, and it will help people that don't as well. You're not creating an advantage for a certain group, are you? If you give it everybody, everybody's got the same opportunity.
Indeed.
100%. Just following on from the inclusive hiring process, how important is having diversity in your teams?
It's a hard one. I mean, it's super important. Harder in tech. And I'm leading platform teams at the moment, which is slightly harder even than like software engineering. But it's critical. It's critical to outcomes. We know all of the evidence now suggests that a diverse team generates better outcomes. Because there's, again, different lived experiences we've talked about. And somebody coming to it, and the simplest of examples is the gender drop down or the kind of title drop down on a form, and not everybody would see that short list and think that's not fully representative, and then do you really need it? And so there's little things like that where you just hear different perspectives, and not having that diversity in teams really limits that. Even just the different opinions in tech of like a female viewpoint on a problem is massively different to again your middle class white male kind of thing. So we know it makes a difference to outcomes. And again, we were talking about hiring there, doing your best to try and make sure that the funnel is as wide as possible, so that you're not ruling people out early. And it's interesting, you talk about things like diversity targets and things like that, which are super controversial. And I remember GSK back in the day having some, but they were almost there to make sure they weren't needed. Kind of as a step. Now, that's a complex conversation, and it's almost another podcast. But trying to create a more inclusive funnel so that you at least see all of that talent and then can make a decision based on skills and things like that. But diverse teams generate better outcomes.
And I suppose with it, especially in the tech and the software space, it helps with the innovation side of things, doesn't it? Which is
hugely key. Yeah, absolutely. It's again, we've talked about having all voices in the room. If all of those voices look and sound the same as me, am I going to get all of the challenge, all of the voices, all of the different opinions that I should be getting? I need those voices to all be different. I need to hear from every sector. The multifaceted nature of it brings a better overall picture to how we're solving problems.
Definitely it's key. The more that we can do to ensure that like you said, the tunnel stays wide, the better, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. One question I wanted to ask, I know it's a topic you spoke about at Mews in particular, is the importance of allyship.
It's I talk about this on LinkedIn as well. I try to be a huge advocate for both LGBT community and indeed for mental health. And touching on mental health first, like as a person who's struggled with his mental health most of his adult life, really bad bouts of depression, medicated, things like that, making it safe to talk about is one of the biggest things I've seen. And I remember a head of HR in a previous company saying, do you know you've got the team with the most mental health problems in the company? And I was like, I haven't. But the others are just not talking about it. So creating that safe space where people can actually bring themselves to work, not that it's required, but where it's safe is huge. Again, if somebody's having a bad day because of their mental health, well, I want to hear about that, because I might be able to help. If nothing else, I might be able to create space for that person where, they've got more going on. And I need that periodically. And it's there's still a lot of stigma attached to it. Can you have mental health issues and be high performing? I'm high performing, and I have been for years. But I've also had a lot of mental health issues, and the two aren't exclusive. So it's super important as a topic, and I try to make sure I talk about that. It's on my LinkedIn. It's I talk about it at work, but allyship as well. Again, we've talked about diverse teams, and LGBT representation within the workplace is still quiet in too many organizations. And as I was saying before, like as a parent of a trans child, they've encouraged me to have a voice. I recognize my own privilege, and I recognize the positional power I have as a director of engineering. So we've written talks together on transgender, we've written blog posts together, things like that. I've spoken at conferences on it, and I did a chat at Mews on that bush there were hundreds and hundreds of people there. And it's really just trying to surface the importance of the conversation. It's brilliant. I mean, Mews has a pride group now, Samir runs, and it's superb. It's superb to see that conversation active and visible, because again, we'll only get better because of it. I was lucky at GSK, the LGBT group there was called Spectrum. So you kind of felt like a Bond villain as well. It was brilliant. But it had over 3,000 people in it,
wow,
which was phenomenal.
Wow.
And I got to march at Pride in London for the Stonewall 50, so like the 50 years since Stonewall. And it was just amazing. And I've never felt such love and togetherness. Bringing that into the workplace is super important. And again, it's diverse voices. It's making a place welcome for everybody. I do my best to try and be noisy on both of those topics, because it's important. It's important.
It's very important. And Mews, what an organisation to give you the platform to talk to hundreds of people, like you said, all at once, and championing that with their groups themselves as well. Which actually loops back to the hiring as well, doesn't it? Because you mentioned something to me when we spoke a couple of weeks ago that stuck with me. And if you're looking to hire from diverse groups, diverse backgrounds, you need to be showcasing how open you are to that as a business, and there's almost welcoming of that.
100%.
And if there's nothing there on your LinkedIn or your employees or your website, it's like, it doesn't sit, does it?
Yeah, no, completely. And some of that comes from leaders being fully aware of the space. So on LinkedIn, for example, I follow Pink News, which is an LGBT publication, Stonewall. And, you hear from the community, you hear what's going on. And again, that just helps in trying to create a better space. It's about having the conversation for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Thank you very much for that.
No worries.
Just wanted to nip back onto feedback before we come towards the end. How do you go about individually and as a business? How do you go about receiving that and or collecting that feedback? Do you have weekly one-to-one, employee net promoters?
Yeah, I mean, typically, like with certainly all of my directs, I'll have weekly one-to-ones, and we've made it part of the culture. I think people get hung up on feedback as well, though. It's feedback can seem very formal. There's models like situation, behavior, impact, and lots of others, and we kind of get into this place where we put barriers up to feedback. The aim of feedback is just to change practice or help somebody recognize that they could change practice. So even things like coaching can generate a feedback opportunity, because if you've done something that there's a potential growth area in, I can just coach you through and say, how do you feel that went? Where do you feel you really nailed it? Where do you feel you could improve? And just helping you have that conversation. So sometimes it's just about helping somebody recognize there was an alternative. But we get so scared of feedback. And in real terms, it holds businesses back. Without that feedback culture, and again, we've talked earlier on about, you have to build trust before you get there. You have to care about the person. But without building that feedback culture first, you will struggle to get to outcomes. And indeed, we're very good at vertical feedback in organizations. So as a manager, it's almost expected that I give my manager feedback and vice versa. And same with an engineering manager and their individual contributor team. What we don't see as much of, and again, this is about trust in the teams and creating high-performing teams, is horizontal. And some of that's simple to do in teams, like creating a pull request for code and then somebody reviewing it. Like, that's still feedback. But it's even better if somebody says, I've got some feedback on that presentation you just gave. And as soon as you get peers doing that, that's you've unlocked the golden ticket at that point. Because again, it's you're at a point where, we talked about a little bit about bell curves earlier on, and the job of any manager is to move that bell curve further to the right. So typically if it's low performing on the left, high performing on the right, you want to either make the left get a bit shorter, so it's a steeper bell curve, or you just want to move it right slightly.
Yeah.
And feedback's one of the immediate vehicles to do that.
Yeah, definitely. It's so important. But like you said, it does create a bit of nervousness, doesn't it? You know, you mentioned feedback, people get a bit, clam up a little bit, but I suppose it all loops back again to the trust, doesn't it?
100%.
The trust environment. That's brilliant. Last thing, last but one, the transparency and communication. I know we've talked about it previously. I know that you've written blogs on it, and I really liked some of the work that you've put out on LinkedIn around the umbrella, as opposed to you called it the heat shield, I think. So how important is that transparency and communication within your teams?
Yeah, it's critical. And there is that brilliant analogy of the poop umbrella. So, protecting your teams fully, in this impervious layer, so they don't get any of the stuff coming down from above, kind of thing. And that's true of every org. There's always pressure from above. There's always a little bit of politics. Even in a good org, there's always a bit of politics. And it's a model I've never really liked. And again, Mary Williams back in the day shared with me this concept of the heat shield, and there's the space shuttle. So when it's coming into land, it has a heat shield on there. Now, if it prevented all of the heat from getting in, it would be too heavy and the thing wouldn't be able to come back to Earth. It would crash. So you have to let some of the heat in, but not to the point where the people inside burn up, kind of thing. So I love that analogy. My teams should have the context that I've got as much as possible. Obviously, there's always, sensitive things that you can't share. But the more context they've got, the more I can step away. Because they're typically making day-to-day decisions on the code, on how we deliver products for customers. So the more context they've got, the less I have to give direction. And that's the healthiest team. I want a team of leaders. I don't want a team of followers who I'm having to give instruction to. So I overshare, if I'm honest. And my boss would acknowledge this, and maybe 4 times a year he'll go like, "Oh God, Terry." But I've already shared 400 other things that year that have given my team context to help them make better decisions. And that deliberate transparency is so powerful for teams. You can't have autonomy in a team if you don't know what's going on. If you haven't got the context, you can't make decisions. So it's about maximizing the context for those teams, for sure. And it's I talk about it as a dial. So typically communication is the first thing that suffers when you're busy and stuff like that. And often communication in teams is down at 1 or 2. It can be quite low. Mine is arguably at 10. But it's easier to go from 10 down to 8 and kind of tweak it slightly than to go from 1 up to 7. So I always lean on over communication massively with my teams. And so far, that's working really well. My teams are typically high performing. They're really visible in the org. They're delivering impact. But it's because they've got all the information I've got. And without that, they couldn't be making the decisions or moving as quick as they are. So I'm a massive fan of the heat shield for, providing them as much context as I can while still protecting them from some of that context that I can't share, of course. But it's the best way to get autonomous teams.
And I think also it stops people from making up that, because your my natural reaction would be you start your own thoughts, don't you? 100%. And you start making up situations which won't be right, and a lot of times it can cause problems. The stories we tell ourselves when there's gaps in context. Absolutely, we all do it. It's a natural human reaction. So maximize the context, and people don't have to tell themselves stories. Exactly. Final thing, Terry, one last thing. What's the most important or the best lesson that you've learned as a leader over the years? There's a brilliant, I'm going to jump to a quote.
because it's so important, and it's Maya Angelou's, and I get it wrong every time. It's on my blog, and it's one I live by, but I get it wrong every time. You know, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And again, everything we've just talked about is about putting culture first, putting the people first, because people create value.
Yeah.
You know, lines of code aren't creating value if the people aren't there. So I love that as a lesson, and I didn't follow that enough in my early career. I wish I could go back and tell me it's actually, you know what, it's not the tech, it's all about the people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that quote from her. It's so powerful.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you so much. Thank you for me bending your ear with so many questions.
I've loved it.
It was great to have you. Honestly, the massive value add there. It was great to have you on board, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Really happy for the chat. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers,
Take care. Bye now.
Bye-bye.